Home invasions happen every day.
The two men walking room to room, scoping out the loot.
911 Quarter Line, where's your emergency?
My house is being robbed by two individuals. Please get somebody there right away.
April 8, 2016, 7:30 a.m. A quiet spring morning in Fairhaven, Massachusetts is shattered by the sound of smashing glass. Within seconds, an unidentified man enters a home that is not his own.
The burglar broke in through the back door, went to the front of the house, opened the front door, and invited the second burglar into the home. Once they were inside, they started to peruse the residence, all the while being observed by the resident owner's dog.
What they don't know is that a security camera is already catching their every move. They wander about the first floor, taking their time as if they're looking for something. Their behavior is odd.
A lot of burglars, when they commit a burglary and they enter into a residence or a business, are in a frantic state of mind and being and move in a way that is commensurate with that. And then there are other ones who are brazen and don't care, and those are the ones that are potentially dangerous. The burglars were very relaxed. They moved slowly around the home, apparently completely unaware that they were on surveillance video.
They even call out to the homeowner's dog.
You want a treat? Come on. Come get a treat. Come on.
What are they looking for? And why did they choose this particular house? Whatever it is, they haven't found it yet. So they decide to head upstairs.
In this case, one of the burglars actually goes into the daughter's bedroom.
But there's something else these two men don't know. Not only are they being recorded by a security camera, they're being watched by the homeowner himself, graphic designer Damien Gerard.
It was a Friday morning, and I had left my house with my daughter. I was bringing her to school, and then I got to work. So it was about 7:30 when I got the alert on my computer that there was activity on my cameras.
Damien works just a few miles away. After getting a security alert, he pulls up the video feed and gets a terrifying shock.
I was really mad. Just the fact that somebody's going to take someone else's personal property, but to be so nonchalant about it, like they're shopping.
You want a treat? Come on.
I'm thinking, what's he going to do? What's he going to do with my dog? Is he going to try to silence her somehow? There was a lot of thoughts were running through my head.
He immediately calls the police.
911 Quarter Line, where's your emergency?
My house is being robbed by two individuals. Please get somebody there right away.
We received a call from Mr. Gerard on a 911 system, and he told us that he was actually watching a break in progress at his residence from his video surveillance system inside his house.
You know who they are?
No, I do not. I just saw it on my security cam.
Damien gave us a play-by-play as to where the suspects were in his house as our officers were responding.
Where were they in the house?
One was walking in the front door. The other one came in from the other way.
Damien jumps in his car, and just 8.5 minutes after receiving the alert that his security camera had been activated, arrives home. The Fairhaven Police and Massachusetts State Police are already waiting for him in his driveway.
I gave one of the officers the key to my house, and they unlocked the door and all ran in.
When you arrive on scene, you never really know what is going to happen or how it's going to unfold. It's a very dynamic, fluid situation. You don't know what's around the next corner. You're not exactly sure how many suspects you may be encountering, whether they're armed, what their intentions are. Entering a house in a situation like this can be very, very dangerous. You're pretty much going in blind.
Third floor, there! On your feet!
The homeowner got the alert, called the police, and then watched the whole drama play out live.
Damien Gerard had had his home broken into when he was a child, so he knew installing security cameras was a smart move. But not even he expected to watch his own home being invaded right before his eyes. After receiving an alert, Damien logs on to check his home's security cameras and gets a gut-wrenching shock. A clear view of two men burglarizing his house.
You don't expect to see a stranger in your house. Then they're, calling your dog over.
Come on, baby. You want cookie?
My heart just sank at that moment when I realized what was going on. I had said out loud, my house is being robbed. My coworkers, which the cubicle's right alongside me, both jumped up and were looking at my screen as I got up and was running out of the building, calling 911.
Where were they in the house?
One was walking in the front door, the other one came in from the other way.
As Damien rushes to meet police at his home, his colleagues are glued to the live security camera video.
And my coworkers all watched it happen live. It was like they were watching a TV show. So they were huddled around my computer the whole time.
They watch as, guns drawn, Fairhaven police officers carefully enter the house and go upstairs, unsure of exactly where the suspects are or what could happen next.
Entering a house in a situation like this can be very, very dangerous. You're pretty much going in blind.
You're on the floor now. You're on the floor now! Hands behind your back. Who else is with you?
Officer Betancourt recounted one of the suspects who was in the process of gathering up valuables from inside the residence. He ordered him to the ground, placed him in handcuffs, and took him into custody without incident.
Broke into a house. I didn't break into anything.
However, the second man has other ideas.
While he was taking him into custody, the second perpetrator jumped out the second floor window. In fact, if you watch the video, you can see the silhouette of him falling down through the window to the ground. I've been doing this for 19 years. I've seen some pretty strange things. This definitely ranks him on the top of them.
So he came out of this window, jumped down to here. They ran across the yard this way, hopped this fence, ran into this park.
I was extremely angry. Your imagination just goes wild. You want revenge. You want justice.
Damien is furious. He sees red. He's so angry he chases after the fleeing robber, while the Fairhaven police close in quickly.
While it's understandable that some crime victims are so angry and overcome by emotion that they confront or pursue the perpetrator, that can be very dangerous, especially when you don't know what the perpetrator is capable of or if he's armed.
I don't know what I was going to do if I caught him. I kept calling him told him to stop. I'm gonna kill you.
Fortunately, though, before the homeowner can catch up to the burglar, the police catch up and they arrest the second fleeing burglar.
And Damien returns to his home to assess the damage. What he finds delivers a gut punch.
They were in my daughter's room. They went through all her stuff, her jewelry, everything. They had taken a pillowcase and they were putting everything in it. So they had my daughter's piggy bank in there. They had a change jar from my son's room. I don't know. I don't understand how they can go into a room that's obviously a little girl's room, and start ransacking it, taking her piggy bank, taking an 11-year-old girl's piggy bank. It kind of makes you wonder. She's a pretty tough kid. She definitely felt funny here for the first few weeks afterwards, especially where they were in her room. It makes me sad that there's people in the world like that, and it can happen anywhere.
28-year-old Brian Chandanias was the burglar arrested in the home. 29-year-old Jay Birch was arrested after police caught up with him.
They were both charged with breaking and entering the daytime to commit a felony, possession of burglarious instruments, and 2 counts of vandalism.
If I could have asked them one thing, why my house? It's not flashy, it's just a regular place. As a matter of fact, at that time, the house next door to me belonged to a Fairhaven police sergeant. I think if they were watching, they probably wouldn't have picked it, just knowing I have a couple of neighbors that work in law enforcement.
And it turns out the break-in may have been a case of mistaken identity.
It seemed like it was just like a smash and grab, but the Fairhaven police seemed to think that they had the wrong house targeted. I think they believed they were breaking in somewhere else.
They obviously broke into the wrong house because they chose the house that had the video surveillance system, which ultimately got them convicted.
And most important of all, Damien's beloved pets are safe and sound.
We really love our pets here. That was like my biggest concern.
Chloe, you okay?
Yeah.
Just Chloe the Wonder Dog, God Dog Extraordinaire.
Coming up.
She screamed bloody murder. I mean, you don't even have to know the story to watch that video and think, this is incredible.
It may be the state capital, but for those who live there, Oklahoma City feels like a small town.
I've always said Oklahoma's just different than everywhere else. It's kind of like a big family.
But that warm community feeling is shattered by a terrifying home invasion in broad daylight.
Strange man had just walked into their home.
So you just came into my home.
Monday, January 13th, 2020. Northwest 6th Street in downtown Oklahoma City, 4:15 in the afternoon. A woman is at home with her son and her 2 dogs, a Great Dane and a Chihuahua. Her husband is out of town, and her other children are grown and out of the house. The new modern home has been equipped with security cameras, and they soon capture some disturbing activity. A large man holding a black sack breaks into the house.
He was white male. He was probably about 6 foot. His hair was very long, very scraggly, very dirty. He was not the kind of guy you would want to see standing in your foyer when you walk around the corner. He had walked up the sidewalk on the east side of the house. There are 3 doors that go into the house from there. He chose the middle door, which was unlocked, and walked into the house. Usually people try to break in to houses where people are at work and nobody is at home. I don't believe this guy actually knew anybody was in the house, but I don't know that he would have cared if he did know.
In the adjacent dining room, the unsuspecting homeowner has no idea there's an intruder in her house.
So she was home alone with her son who was blind. He can't see what's happening. All he can do is listen. He heard him come into the house and heard a little bit of rummaging. So she thought, maybe my other son is home. He shouldn't be, but maybe he just came in the back door for whatever reason.
The first to check out the intruder is Dubai, a 122-pound Great Dane.
Her Great Dane had come trotting in there with his tail wagging until he saw somebody that he didn't know. You could see the demeanor of the dog change instantly. The tail went down. He didn't become aggressive, but he circled the guy, and the guy was able to pet the dog, and the dog wasn't real sure of what was going on.
You could tell he was maybe sniffing around, thinking to himself, who is this? What's going on here? The stranger that had broken into the home actually reached down to pet him, and Dubai was pretty friendly.
It seems the large dog is too gentle to offer much protection to the woman and her son sitting in the next room. But then, the woman goes out to the kitchen to see what's going on and gets a horrifying shock.
I think she was expecting it to be her older son, if not at least one of her kids, but was nobody that she knew and nobody that she'd seen before or recognized. She was just panicked, almost frozen, just wondering who this person is, what do they want, how am I going to get myself out of this situation safely? And not only myself, but my handicapped son who's also home with me.
The woman stands less than 5 feet tall, and she is unarmed. There is only one thing she can do.
She screamed bloody murder.
And the fear in his beloved owner's voice triggers something deep within Dubai, as well as in Autumn, the family Chihuahua.
Animals, they can pick up on their handlers or riders' energy. They can pick up on that real easy. Dubai felt her energy and knew that this was not right. Once she screamed, he thought, well, okay, now she's going to approve of it. I'm going to eat this guy.
A bold and frightening home invasion is caught on camera.
Surveillance video shows the suspect walking into the home.
Tracy McCoy and her family had just moved to a new home in Oklahoma City a few months earlier, and the close-knit family is used to people coming and going.
It was just an ordinary day, like any other day. At the time, it was just me and one of my sons, Nathaniel, who is blind and delayed. And he and I were sitting with our back towards the door, and we were eating and just waiting for brother to get here so that we could go to the grocery store. So when I heard a side door open, I thought absolutely nothing about it. I thought there was just someone I knew coming through that door. We heard him come in. We heard him kind of mess around and walk around. We were facing the other direction, didn't even think to turn around.
Tracy sees her Great Dane Dubai go investigate, and then hears footsteps approaching.
I knew he was coming into the kitchen area, and I stood up and I turned around and I had a smile on my face and I was going to welcome him, and I came face to face to a complete stranger. My insides were just racing and I just wanted him gone.
Tracy is terrified of the huge man standing in her home, not just for herself, but for her son, Nathaniel, in the next room.
My one and only thought is I had my son sitting at the table that could not defend himself, and all I could think of is that man just had to be out of my home. I had to have him on the other side. He could not be in here.
And her 122-pound Great Dane isn't doing anything to protect her or her son.
Dubai is very mild-mannered. He's very sweet, very passive. I would have anticipated him more hiding behind his mother for protection instead of protecting her.
So Tracy decides to use the only weapon she has on hand, her voice.
I screamed. I honestly did not know if I had just made a really big mistake in screaming like that. I had no idea if he was armed, if he was dangerous, if he was just there to rob us. I had absolutely no clue.
At first, the strange man doesn't react, but Dubai does.
As soon as she screamed is when Dubai, the dog, knew that it wasn't somebody that was supposed to be in their house. Dubai immediately starts biting him and pushing him out the door.
He turned very quick. He learned to be aggressive instantly by her reaction. I think that's where Dubai got his protectiveness. He felt Tracy's energy and knew that this was not right. Dubai went for the guy's butt, and then when the guy turned and started to go out, the next thing was the guy's face or neck. I know he jumped up high and got pushed off, and together they were able to get him out of the house.
You don't even have to know the story or hear us talk about it to watch that video and think, this is incredible.
Once the man is out of the house, Tracy slams the door behind him.
Once Dubai and I got him on the other side of the door, I made sure Dubai stayed in. I did not want him following him out. So he finally made his way through the gate, and once I saw that he was actually leaving, at that point in time, I did call 911.
Oklahoma City 911.
Just had a guy come into, I think he's just homeless. He just came into my home and he's walking out of my gate right now. He's walking down 6th Street going west.
As Oklahoma PD raced to the residence, the intruder takes off, but he doesn't get far.
They got there super quick and they were able to catch the guy before he even made it down the street.
Tracy gave a good enough description over the radio, and our officers were close enough that they were able to catch him within 2 blocks, and she positively identified him.
Tracy had attended a citizens academy with our police department. She knew to study his face, to remember features about him that she could tell police.
The intruder turns out to be 30-year-old Robert Ward.
He said he came in down here from Kansas on a bus. His story was that it looked like a house of somebody that he knew, and that's why he went in there.
Robert Ward is arrested and charged with burglary, and everyone agrees that the hero of the day is Dubai, and it's all been captured on camera.
When we saw the video, I was quite embarrassed for Dubai because he let him just sit there and pet him, a total stranger coming to our home. So it's like I was a little embarrassed for him, but then when he did what he did, he made up for it.
I think this crime was scary. It's especially scary when you have a kid home, especially a kid that needs your help 24/7. But I also think it could have ended a lot worse, and we're lucky that it didn't. A lot of people don't have a 6-foot Great Dane that can protect them from anybody who waltzes into their home. It was such a good reminder for people that pets can be really smart at times.
These days, Dubai has become something of a local hero.
People recognize him even today. He was asked to go to our fire station, which is just around the corner. They had an event for their children's burn center, and he was asked to come and introduced as the hero. And I'm chopped liver, so I'm just the woman who has the dog. He's just a good boy.
It's like a scene out of a big-budget action movie.
An RV chase ripping through the San Fernando Valley.
May 21st, 2019, 7 p.m. There's typically heavy rush hour traffic in LA's San Fernando Valley.
This is a time of day that people are coming home from work. Maybe they're going shopping, picking up the kids, going to work out.
But in an instant, a normal evening commute turns into horror on the highway.
The last thing they expect is a house on wheels to be coming barreling towards them.
This was an incredible chase. This suspect leading police through the San Fernando Valley in a motorhome.
Speeding down neighborhood streets is a 30-foot RV. Police have been in pursuit for about 10 minutes as the RV swipes parked cars, swerves around corners, and nearly runs other vehicles off the road. News choppers capture the shocking scene from the air.
And the helicopter cam is actually able to capture the enormous size of this RV. What we're watching is a missile going down the street.
The erratic driver is clocking over 70 miles per hour, and to everyone's horror, blatantly ignores every red light.
Speeding in and out of traffic, onto oncoming traffic.
It's utterly terrifying to watch as the RV flies through one intersection after another without stopping.
The driver of the RV was definitely driving erratically, and it was very unpredictable and shocking.
Who is this reckless driver, and what are they running from?
At the time of the pursuit, the information that we had was that it was a stolen vehicle.
The out-of-control RV clearly poses a lethal threat. But with a vehicle this size going this fast, traditional police tactics won't work.
During a normal pursuit with a vehicle, they use spike strips or maybe a pit maneuver. But something this size, this is going to pose extreme difficulty for law enforcement.
A pit maneuver is a technique where an officer pushes the suspect's rear bumper, forcing the fleeing car to spin sideways and stop. Spike strips are another option, which police sometimes use to bring a vehicle to an abrupt halt. But with one this large, that's quickly ruled too dangerous.
Because the size of this RV, if spike strips were laid down and the tire blew out, and now all of a sudden you had this RV careening out of control, it would be catastrophic.
Then, when the RV weaves through a parking lot, it looks as if police can close in. But when the wild driver rounds the corner, the RV smashes head-on into a palm tree.
We see the side of the RV tear open like a tin can, and that doesn't stop her. She still continues to go.
And now, half the right side has been ripped off.
The roof is collapsed in on the windshield. I don't even know how the driver could see at this point. This is beyond dangerous.
But incredibly, this reckless driver keeps going. And just when it seems the chase couldn't get wilder, the helicopter camera zooms in and catches something truly mind-boggling.
As the camera zooms in, we see something totally bizarre. It's actually a dog. There's a dog on this driver's lap.
At the wheel of the speeding RV is a woman, and standing up on the broken windshield is a large dog. Somehow, the driver manages to hold on to both the dog and the wheel. A couple miles away, neighborhood resident Terry Fox watches the bizarre scene unfold on the evening news.
She was almost trying to pull the dog back into this demolished RV, and we're just watching in disbelief.
Terry is the founder of a local dog rescue, and what happens next stuns her to the core.
What happened there? What happened there? Okay, so he came to a stop.
I think the dog might have jumped out.
Right there, trying to jump out. The dog, no, don't jump out. Dog jumped out.
And then he jumped. And I screamed. The windows were open, and I could hear other people, oh no! We were all watching on the news around the country and holding our breath when that dog jumped out of the RV. It was devastating to watch.
Astonishingly, the dog survives the jump from the speeding RV and limps off, as the out-of-control driver keeps going on a path of seemingly endless destruction. And that's when cameras capture another jaw-dropping sight that shocks everyone.
No, look at it here. The dog is there. Another dog?
There's another dog.
This is so beyond dangerous, and you just got this feeling that this might not end well.
For 30 minutes, a Los Angeles neighborhood is terrorized by an out-of-control RV barreling through intersections with 2 dogs inside.
An RV chase ripping through the San Fernando Valley here. The driver of that motorhome not seeming to care about other lives or the 2 dogs inside.
After one of the dogs leaps from the speeding vehicle, the RV T-bones a car.
We've reached the point where this has gone from bad to worse.
How much more damage can this crazed driver cause?
We see the RV coming down the street. There's a vehicle and it looks like he's gonna pull over and get out of her way. Then the unthinkable happens.
For 52-year-old David Opel, a married father of 2, the nightmare begins when he is driving home and out of nowhere the RV flies into his lane.
Like all of a sudden she was there and then cut me off. And she didn't miss me by much, probably, maybe a couple feet. It wasn't very much.
Shaken, David pulls over to call his wife.
I said, "You're not gonna believe this. I almost got killed by a crazy RV." I said, "It's like something out of the movie Speed."
Thankful to have avoided an accident, David gets back on the road. He notices the helicopters moving in a different direction.
And so I said, "Oh, okay, I guess everybody went that way." And I didn't really think about it again.
But just a few minutes later, and only a couple miles from home, David notices something that makes his blood run cold.
And as I go through the stop sign, I just happen to look at my rearview mirror and I see the RV coming up behind me. It was like a Stephen King movie, So it's like all of a sudden back behind me, chasing me. I was like, where did that come from? How did it get behind me?
Not only is the RV barreling right towards him, David knows he can't outrun it.
I realized that she wasn't going to stop and I needed to get off the street.
With the RV gaining momentum, David pulls into the first driveway he can, but there's a major problem.
When I started to turn into the driveway, and I noticed there was a car parked there, so I had to stop or I would have hit the car.
With nowhere to go, David is a sitting duck as the RV heads right for him.
Your brain does really weird things. I didn't close my eyes. I watched the whole thing happen. You just hear the crunch and the smashing. Still to this day, I know exactly the sound.
After plowing violently into David and then several trees, the RV finally comes to a stop.
Now she has crashed into this vehicle. You would think everything's over.
Then, unbelievably, the suspect makes a run for it on foot.
This woman is doing everything she can to get away from the police.
Finally in custody, the suspect is identified as 52-year-old Julianne Rainbird, who stole another woman's identity and credit card to purchase the RV. She is charged with 9 felonies, including cruelty to animals and assault with a dangerous weapon.
Investigators saying this is potentially a DUI case.
David is rushed to the hospital, and police assist the driver of the first crash, who is miraculously uninjured. One of the woman's dogs is taken in by Animal Services, while a volunteer rescue team searches for the other dog who leapt from the speeding RV. 4 hours later, she's finally found, alive, but with a broken paw.
Animal Services, they say those dogs are now in their care. Again, they are expected to make that full recovery.
The dogs, both female mastiffs, are placed with Terry Fox's Animal Rescue for adoption. She's immediately flooded with thousands of applicants.
All these people from across the world just messaging us.
Hundreds of miles away in Oregon, Jen and Sean Latham hear about the dogs through social media.
My reaction when I saw that, I burst into tears. I cried.
Yeah.
I just don't understand how people can do things like that to dogs.
They immediately put in a request to adopt both dogs.
We have a giant fenced backyard. We have the time. We had, everything. And I was like, they're just supposed to be with us. They're supposed to be my dogs.
But Jen and Sean must anxiously wait several weeks while their application is reviewed.
I kept thinking, this isn't going to happen. These dogs are in LA. They're going to find homes for these dogs.
Meanwhile, back in Los Angeles, David spends nearly a week in the hospital for severe injuries, including a fractured back.
I had 5 broken ribs, punctured lung, and I'm still dealing with some shoulder problems because of the impact.
Along with enduring months of physical therapy, David continues to deal with emotional scars.
The PTSD is pretty severe, so it doesn't help that I drive past that driveway very often. It's right down the bottom of my street, so I pass the accident scene regularly. So that's not easy.
Julianne Rainbird, who is awaiting trial, has never explained why she was driving so recklessly that day. But David is still angry that she endangered so many lives.
She had a lot of choices. Every time she went through an intersection, she had a choice to stop. She didn't. And for that, she needs to be punished.
As for the two dogs, named Onyx and Starlet, they're now part of Jen and Sean's family.
And we are just so happy that they got to go from such a horrific experience, the one that was so loving.
Our dining room table now is a dog kennel. Nothing doesn't have slobber or drool on it, or slobber or dog hair. But it's like, I don't think that our household has ever been happier. They run and they jump on the trampoline.
Knowing where they came from, it's rewarding for us. They're our babies now. They're part of the family.
We love them.
Yeah.
And coming up, another unthinkable act of animal cruelty.
People were just like, you gotta be kidding me. The footage itself is shocking, made us shake our heads just terribly.
At first, it looks like something people do every day.
You would think that she's tossing just some coffee cups, some trash.
April 18th, 2019, Coachella, California, the desert town best known for its popular music and arts festival. Temperatures here can be deadly.
It was about 98, almost 100 degrees.
And if security cameras at this auto parts store hadn't captured the shocking scene, it would be hard to believe. Just after 1 p.m., a white Jeep pulls up in the parking lot behind the store. With the car still running, a woman jumps out, peers into a dumpster used for recyclables, then moves to the next one.
It just drove up to the dumpsters and nonchalantly tossed what appeared to be a bag of something.
The woman quickly drives off. 16 minutes later, a man starts rummaging through the trash.
We have people who dig through the trash to get cans and, recycles and stuff. He's walking around, you can see he hears something, like he hears a noise, and then he's digging, trying to figure out where the noise is coming from.
The man picks up the clear bag the woman has just dumped and is stunned. Inside, a litter of terrified puppies.
7 puppies that were barely a couple days old, if even that.
They were inside a plastic bag, all wet, sweaty, and just crying.
The bag was sealed. They were tied in a plastic bag, dumped in the trash. I mean, it's despicable.
She came in her Jeep and she just tossed them like they were rags.
The man is so shocked. At first, he isn't sure what to do.
He puts them back down and then he walks away, but then he goes back and gets the bag and then he puts them in the corner where the other guy found them.
15 minutes later, a customer heading into the store spots the bag.
He went right into the store and said, "Hey guys, do you know you have a bag of puppies outside your store?"
While the man calls animal control for help, store employees bring the terrier mix puppies inside, out of the scorching heat.
Everybody was just devastated. They probably would have suffocated.
Just to see that was so heartbreaking. We don't really know how long they were in that bag prior to those 30 minutes that they were here.
Investigators plead with the public to take a close look at the surveillance video.
The search continues for the woman who faces felony animal cruelty charges. If you recognize her, call the Riverside Sheriff's Department.
Who is she, and why did she do this? The shocking video sparks intense anger.
Throwing 7 newborn puppies into a garbage heap.
That she was trying to conceal the puppies.
Oh, they just couldn't believe that somebody would do that to 4 innocent puppies. But it was caught on tape. It shocked the world. This was 7 living creatures.
On social media, people call the woman a monster, and everyone wants authorities to find her.
People equate it to just like children. They're innocent. They don't have a voice of their own. We're responsible to take care of them. And she chose to put them in a bag that was disgusting and throw them in the trash and discard them like garbage.
And that disgust only escalates when, 3 days after the puppies are found, the story takes a tragic turn.
One of the puppies that was tossed into a Coachella dumpster, then rescued, has died.
That really touched the nerve of people.
We just wanted justice for the puppies.
After 7 newborn puppies are rescued from a dumpster, they're rushed to a shelter. Their condition is delicate. They are so small they are palm-sized and have to be fed with bottles. But they respond quickly, and the shelter shares photos of them as they open their eyes for the first time. But after a few days, there's a heartbreaking development.
One of the puppies did actually perish, so there's only 6 puppies that are alive. But I mean, certainly considering that they were tied in a plastic bag, dumped in the trash, temperatures are 90 degrees plus, the fact that 6 survived is probably a minor miracle.
Still, the case infuriates people, and people are eager to do whatever they can to help. At the auto parts store where they were dumped, the phone rings non-stop.
We started getting a lot of calls. They wanted to donate money, clothes, sweaters, and little shirts, pillows, food. I mean, anything you could think of, they brought.
And everyone is anxious for investigators to find the woman who did this.
A lot of people called in, gave us tips.
One thing is certain. She seemed to have no idea there were surveillance cameras at the site.
You're at a business. There's going to be cameras everywhere.
Napa had some great camera angles. The images of the white Jeep are quite clear. The license plate was pretty clear.
It only takes investigators a few days to figure out who she is. A 54-year-old local woman named Deborah Colwell, and they head straight to her home.
The suspect exited her residence, so I got out of the vehicle, confronted her, placed her under arrest in her handcuffs.
Breaking news, an arrest in a puppy dumping case caught on camera in Coachella.
Debbie, why did you do that? Why would you throw those puppies away like trash?
Deborah says nothing to reporters, but admits to investigators that she is the woman in the video.
She seemed like the jig was up, I think, because of all the publicity over the weekend. It was just kind of like, yeah, I did it. Here I am. Let's get this over with.
But why? What investigators discover next is even more shocking.
The house was full of dogs.
38 of them.
Damn, you have 38 more dogs? It was just disgusting.
So you had dogs hiding in little nooks and crannies. Just sad. I mean, just real sad. You just can't have dozens of dogs inside a cramped single-family home. It's not healthy.
Colwell doesn't offer much of an explanation, except to say it all started with a few dogs, but then they began breeding and things got out of hand.
She said she just felt overwhelmed, and she said that she didn't want to turn them into the shelter. She did have priors. She did have an arrest record with drug charges and such.
People are so furious about the puppy dumping, a petition is circulated urging prosecutors to give Colwell the maximum penalty on the charges she faces.
7 charges, felony counts for animal cruelty, and 7 misdemeanor counts for abandoning animals.
Then, at a bail hearing in June 2019, her attorney manages to make people even angrier.
Puppies aren't people. They're not people.
People were just like, you gotta be kidding me. No, this was 7 living creatures tossed like garbage. That's the part that has transcended around the world. People can't fathom that somebody would be so cruel.
Colwell never goes to trial. Instead, after initially pleading not guilty, on August 14th, she pleads guilty to all charges.
She got 365 days in county jail, a myriad of probation conditions, such as not owning any animals for the duration of her probation, which ends in 2026.
With credit for time served, Colwell actually serves 174 days. She is also ordered to undergo random drug testing and get mental health counseling.
I just want to ask her, like, why? Why would you do that? You have no heart whatsoever.
As for the puppies, for the 6 who did survive, there's a happy ending. They've all been adopted.
They're very healthy, and they've turned into some really cute little doggies.
Those are strong little puppies.
All of the other 38 dogs found in Colwell's house were also adopted.
What she did was wrong. I hope she realizes what she did.
In this day and age, there's no need to do that. You have alternatives. There are so many nonprofit rescue organizations that will help people. These puppies survived because they were good people and a lot of great kindness by a lot of strangers, all doing the right thing for animals that need it. So there is redemption, of course, in what we believe to be one of the most despicable acts of alleged animal cruelty that we've ever seen.
The rain started before dawn, the kind of slow, whispering rain that turns quiet streets into mirrors of gray light. In a small town tucked deep inside the forests of Oregon, mornings usually arrived gently. Coffee brewing, pickup trucks starting, dogs barking somewhere down gravel roads. But on the morning of October 17th, 1998, the silence carried something heavier, something wrong. Because by the time the sun struggled through the clouds, a young woman had vanished without a trace, and a case that would haunt the community for decades had just begun. Her name was Emily Carter, 23 years old. Bright smile, quick laugh, the kind of person who waved at strangers and remembered everyone's name. She worked the late shift at a small diner just off the highway, a place where truck drivers stopped for pie and locals gathered to complain about the rain. That night had been ordinary. Too ordinary. Emily wiped down the counter, joked with a regular about football, and clocked out just after midnight. One coworker remembered seeing her pull on a denim jacket and step into the cold night air. The parking lot lights flickered. Her old blue sedan sat where she always parked it. Then she drove away. It should have taken her 7 minutes to get home. 7 minutes down a narrow two-lane road lined with pine trees. 7 minutes past quiet houses and empty mailboxes. 7 minutes through a town where nothing violent ever seemed to happen. Emily never made it. At 7:12 the next morning, her mother noticed something strange. Emily's car was not in the driveway. That alone wasn't unusual. Sometimes Emily stayed with friends after late shifts. But the house felt wrong. Too quiet. Too still. Her phone rang unanswered. Messages went unheard. By noon, worry turned into dread. By evening, deputies from the county sheriff's office were knocking on doors. A missing person report became the town's first true mystery in years. Within hours, volunteers began searching the roads around town. Pickup trucks rolled slowly down gravel lanes. Flashlights swept through damp grass. Someone checked the riverbank. Someone else scanned the logging trails outside town. And then just after sunset, they found something. Emily's blue sedan sat abandoned on the shoulder of a remote forest road 15 miles outside town. The engine was cold. The headlights were off. The driver's door was slightly open, as if someone had stepped out quickly or been pulled out. Inside the car, everything looked almost normal. Her purse sat on the passenger seat. Her keys were still in the ignition. A half-finished soda rested in the cup holder. But the seatbelt hung loose. And on the gravel just outside the door, investigators noticed faint scuff marks, as if shoes had dragged through wet dirt. No blood. No weapon. No sign of where she went. The forest swallowed sound. Pine needles dampened footsteps. And whatever happened on that road left behind almost nothing. By midnight, the sheriff's office called in state investigators. The scene was sealed with yellow tape. Flashlights cut through the fog as deputies searched every inch of ground. Dogs tracked scent trails into the woods and then stopped, as if Emily Carter had simply disappeared into thin air. The news spread quickly across the county. Small towns have their own communication networks, whispers in grocery aisles, rumors passed between gas pumps, quiet conversations behind diner counters. Within 24 hours, everyone knew her name. Everyone knew the words investigators hated to say aloud. Possible abduction. By the third day, helicopters circled overhead. Search teams combed the woods in long lines, boots sinking into mud. Volunteers carried radios and maps. The forest stretched for miles, thick and unforgiving. Any clue could hide beneath fallen branches or moss-covered stones. Nothing. Not a jacket. Not a shoe. Not even a footprint. Detectives began retracing Emily's final hours. They spoke with coworkers, friends, neighbors. Everyone told the same story. Emily had no enemies, no dangerous relationships, no reason to vanish. But one detail kept coming up. A man seen sitting alone at the diner late that night. Several customers remembered him vaguely. An older man, quiet, watching the room. He drank coffee but barely touched his food. He sat in the corner booth for nearly an hour, occasionally glancing toward the counter where Emily worked. No one knew his name. Security cameras inside the diner were old and grainy. The footage showed only a shadowed figure in a baseball cap leaving the building shortly after Emily stepped outside. He walked slowly toward the parking lot. Then the camera lost him. Detectives canvassed the neighborhood around the diner. They checked nearby gas stations. They questioned truck drivers who had passed through town that night. The trail evaporated. Days turned into weeks. Posters appeared on telephone poles and storefront windows. Emily Carter, missing. Volunteers organized candlelight vigils. Her mother spoke to reporters with trembling hands, begging anyone with information to come forward. The tips came in waves. Someone claimed to have seen Emily arguing with a stranger days before she vanished. Another caller insisted a suspicious van had been parked near the diner that night. One anonymous voice suggested she might have run away. Each lead collapsed under scrutiny. Winter arrived early that year in Oregon. Rain turned to frost. Search efforts slowed. The forest hardened under cold winds. Investigators followed every possible theory: kidnapping, random attack, even the possibility that Emily had staged her own disappearance. But none of it fit, because Emily's life was still there, waiting. Her apartment door remained locked. Her favorite books sat beside the bed. Her clothes hung neatly in the closet. Her car still sat inside a police evidence garage, a silent witness to something no one could explain. Months passed. Then a year. The case slowly shifted from breaking news to quiet frustration. Detectives kept working, but the momentum faded. Witness memories blurred. Potential suspects moved away. Physical evidence, what little existed, revealed nothing new. The phrase investigators dread began appearing in internal reports. Cold case. By the early 2000s, Emily Carter's disappearance had become a haunting memory in the community. People still talked about it occasionally, usually in lowered voices. Parents warned their daughters not to drive alone at night. Some believed a stranger passing through town had taken her. Others whispered darker theories, that the person responsible had lived among them the entire time. Someone who knew the roads. Someone who understood the forest. Someone who could vanish without drawing attention. Detectives quietly re-examined the diner footage again and again. The shadowy man in the corner booth remained the most mysterious figure connected to the night Emily disappeared. But the image was too blurry to identify. The angle too poor to reveal his face. Years slipped by. The case file grew thick with reports, interviews, and dead ends. It moved from the active investigation desk to the department archives, a gray metal cabinet filled with unanswered questions. Emily Carter's photograph remained inside the folder. Same bright smile. Same hopeful eyes. And outside that folder, life in the town continued. New families moved in. Children grew up. Businesses changed ownership. The diner where Emily worked replaced its old cameras. Fresh paint covered the walls. But some residents never forgot. Every October, someone still placed flowers near the roadside where her car had been found. No one admitted to doing it. Yet every year, the flowers appeared. A quiet reminder that somewhere in the dark forests of Oregon, the truth remained buried. And the most chilling possibility lingered in the minds of investigators who had once walked that gravel road under cold rain. The person responsible might still be out there, watching, waiting, living an ordinary life just a few houses away. The years did not erase Emily Carter. They simply buried her beneath routine, beneath the quiet rhythm of a town trying to forget something it never truly understood. The forest roads remained the same, long ribbons of asphalt cutting through dark walls of pine, damp in the mornings, silent at night. Drivers still passed the lonely shoulder where her blue sedan had been found. Most didn't know the story anymore, but the older residents did. They slowed slightly when they drove through that stretch. Some avoided looking at it altogether. Inside the sheriff's office, the case file never disappeared. It sat in a locked cabinet labeled with a phrase investigators used with a mixture of frustration and quiet determination: cold case. Every few months, someone reopened the folder. A detective flipping through brittle reports. A new deputy studying the photographs. Grainy diner footage. Maps marked with search grids. Interview transcripts from witnesses who had long since moved away. One photograph always seemed to stop people. Emily's car sitting alone on that forest road. The driver's door cracked open. Pine needles scattered across damp gravel. A still image that captured the exact moment when normal life ended and mystery began. In the first months after her disappearance, investigators had worked the case aggressively. They tracked down every vehicle seen leaving town that night. They interviewed dozens of people who had been at the diner. Truck drivers, late-night customers, even teenagers who had been driving around after a football game. But the most persistent mystery remained the same man from the corner booth. Witnesses described him differently. Some said he looked about 50. Others thought he might have been older. One waitress remembered gray hair peeking from beneath his baseball cap. Another insisted he had a thick mustache. Everyone agreed on only one thing. He had watched Emily while she worked. Not openly. Not in a way that drew attention. Just quiet observation. Detectives attempted a sketch based on those conflicting memories. The result was vague, an older man with tired eyes and a neutral expression. Not distinctive enough to trigger recognition. Not detailed enough to identify anyone. The sketch appeared on local news broadcasts. Posters went up in nearby counties. Calls came in from people convinced they recognized the man. Every single lead collapsed. Meanwhile, investigators reconstructed Emily's final drive. Her route from the diner should have taken her straight home through town. Instead, her car ended up 15 miles away on a logging road that curved deep into forest land rarely traveled at night. Why had she gone there? That question haunted detectives. One theory suggested she had been forced off the road. Another proposed she might have followed someone she trusted. There was even speculation that she had been chased. But the physical evidence revealed almost nothing. No tire tracks distinct enough to analyze. No clear footprints. The scuff marks in the gravel suggested movement, possibly a struggle, but the rain that fell that night had already washed away critical details. The forest had erased the moment. Weeks after the disappearance, investigators expanded the search area. They combed riverbanks, abandoned cabins, hunting trails. Divers examined nearby lakes. Planes scanned miles of timberland. Nothing surfaced. The case slowly transitioned from active emergency to long-term investigation. And with that shift came the darker possibility investigators rarely voiced aloud. Sometimes people vanish without leaving a single clue. Still, one small thread remained. During interviews with diner customers, detectives discovered that the mysterious man from the corner booth had been seen in town at least twice before Emily disappeared. Both times, he had sat alone at the diner late at night. Both times, he had ordered coffee. And both times, he left without speaking much to anyone. One waitress remembered something strange. She told investigators the man always seemed to arrive shortly before Emily's shift ended. He rarely stayed long after she left. That detail triggered a troubling possibility. Was he watching her? Detectives began digging through old records, vehicle registrations, property owners, transient workers who might have passed through town during that period. The area around the community included scattered rural homes, logging camps, and seasonal cabins. Hundreds of people moved in and out of the region every year. Any one of them could have been the man in the diner. Months passed before a potential connection appeared. A delivery driver recalled seeing an unfamiliar pickup truck parked near the diner on several nights that fall. The truck was described as an older model, dark green, with a cracked taillight. Investigators traced dozens of vehicles matching that description. They interviewed owners, checked alibis, inspected trucks. None connected to Emily. The investigation hit its first true wall. By the summer of 1999, the town had grown weary of uncertainty. Emily's family held memorial events hoping to keep attention focused on the case. Her mother spoke to reporters repeatedly, urging anyone with knowledge to come forward. "Someone knows something," she said during one interview, her voice breaking under the weight of months without answers. But the silence surrounding the case had already begun to harden. Some residents believed a traveling predator had passed through town that night. Others suspected someone local had committed the crime and simply never been caught. That second theory lingered like a shadow over the community. Because if the person responsible lived nearby, it meant he had been walking among them all along, shopping at the same grocery store, driving the same roads, possibly even attending the same church services. Investigators considered that possibility carefully. They quietly reviewed known offenders in the county. They checked individuals with histories of violence, harassment, or suspicious behavior. Several men were questioned extensively. One was a former logging worker who had once been accused of stalking a woman in a neighboring town. Another was a mechanic who lived alone near the forest road where Emily's car had been found. Neither could be tied to the disappearance. The mechanic's alibi placed him 2 counties away that night. The logging worker had moved out of state months earlier. Another lead came from an anonymous letter mailed to the sheriff's office nearly a year after Emily vanished. The letter contained only a single sentence written in block letters. Check the river north of Mill Road. Investigators immediately organized a search. Divers entered the cold water. Teams walked the muddy banks. Nothing. The letter offered no explanation, no signature, no additional information. It was impossible to know whether it came from someone with knowledge of the crime or from a person chasing attention. Cold cases attract both. As the early 2000s arrived, technology began changing investigative methods across the country. DNA testing improved. Databases expanded. Cases once considered impossible suddenly reopened. Detectives revisited the evidence collected from Emily's car. They searched for biological traces, hair, fibers, fingerprints. Several partial prints were recovered from the driver's door, but they belonged to Emily. Others were too smudged to analyze. One small fiber discovered on the passenger seat sparked brief excitement. It appeared to come from a heavy wool jacket. Investigators tested it against clothing belonging to Emily and her known contacts. No match. Without a suspect to compare against, the fiber became just another lonely clue sealed inside an evidence bag. Years continued slipping by. Emily Carter's name occasionally resurfaced in local newspapers whenever the anniversary of her disappearance arrived. Each article repeated the same haunting facts. Young woman vanishes after leaving diner, car found abandoned on Forest Road, investigation unresolved. And always the same haunting label attached to the case. Cold case. Yet something about the investigation continued to bother detectives who had worked it in those early days. Not the lack of evidence. Not even the strange diner visitor. What troubled them most was how deliberate the disappearance felt. Emily's car had not crashed. It had been stopped. Her belongings remained inside. There were signs she exited the vehicle or was forced out, but no clear evidence of violence at the scene. It looked almost controlled, planned, as if whoever was responsible understood exactly how to leave behind as little evidence as possible. That possibility led investigators toward a darker conclusion. The person responsible might not have been acting randomly. He might have known what he was doing. And if that was true, it raised another chilling possibility. This might not have been the only time. Detectives quietly reviewed missing person cases across nearby counties. Women who vanished along highways. Unsolved assaults reported in rural areas. Several incidents shared vague similarities. But none could be definitively connected. The years kept moving forward. New detectives joined the department. Older ones retired. Each generation inherited the same thick case file and the same unanswered questions. Some studied it out of curiosity. Others became obsessed. Because buried inside those pages was a mystery that had defied explanation for more than 2 decades. A young woman vanished. A car left on a forest road. A shadowy man in a diner booth. And somewhere beyond the reach of evidence or memory, the truth waited silently, hidden in the darkness that had swallowed Emily Carter on a rainy night in Oregon. Time moves strangely around a disappearance. In the beginning, every hour feels urgent. Every lead feels critical. Every phone call might contain the answer. But as months stretch into years, urgency fades into something colder. Files gather dust. Evidence sits sealed in quiet rooms. Witnesses forget small details that once seemed important. The case becomes a memory people carry rather than a problem anyone expects to solve. That was the reality surrounding Emily Carter. By 2005, 7 years had passed since the rainy night she vanished from a lonely forest road in Oregon. The town had changed in subtle ways. A new grocery store opened near the highway. A housing development replaced an old logging yard. Teenagers who had once helped search for Emily as volunteers were now adults raising children of their own. But the question never disappeared. What happened to her? Inside the county sheriff's office, the cold case file remained thick and complicated. Investigators who inherited the case often described the same unsettling feeling when they first reviewed it. There was no shortage of information. Interviews filled hundreds of pages. Maps detailed every search zone. Evidence bags contained fibers, photographs, and fragments of forensic reports. And yet the central event, the moment Emily Carter vanished, remained almost completely invisible. Detective Mark Holloway was one of the first investigators from a new generation to take a serious interest in the file. He joined the department in the early 2000s, years after the original search had ended. Young detectives often gravitate toward cold cases. Something about the unanswered questions creates a quiet challenge, a puzzle left behind by earlier investigators. Holloway approached the file the way experienced detectives often do, by pretending he knew nothing about the case at all. He ignored the theories that had dominated early investigations. He read witness statements as if hearing them for the first time. He studied photographs carefully, paying attention to details others might have overlooked. One detail kept bothering him: the location of Emily's car. Most people assumed the forest road where it was found was random, but Holloway began mapping the area more carefully. He traced possible routes Emily might have driven if someone forced her off the highway. He measured travel times. He examined nearby properties. The road itself ended several miles deeper in the woods near a cluster of old logging clearings. Those clearings were rarely visited. Hunters occasionally used them during the fall season. Logging crews had abandoned the area years earlier. The nearest permanent residence was more than 2 miles away. To someone unfamiliar with the region, the road would have been difficult to find in darkness, which meant whoever stopped Emily there likely knew the area well. That realization shifted Holloway's perspective dramatically. The original investigation had focused heavily on strangers passing through town, truck drivers, travelers, transient workers. But what if the person responsible wasn't a stranger at all? What if he lived nearby? The idea wasn't entirely new. Earlier detectives had considered it briefly. But the theory lost traction because no local resident had ever been directly connected to Emily's disappearance. Still, Holloway decided to test the possibility. He began compiling a list of residents who lived within a 5-mile radius of the forest road where Emily's car had been discovered. Property records from the late 1990s showed several homes scattered through that area, mostly small houses built decades earlier by logging families. Some residents had moved away since then. Others had passed away, but a few still lived there. Holloway started quietly visiting those homes. The conversations were polite at first. People in rural communities often react cautiously when detectives knock on their doors years after a crime. Some remembered the case clearly. Others struggled to recall details. But everyone agreed on one thing. The forest road had always been isolated. Not many people go out there, one resident told him. You have to know it existed. Another man offered an interesting comment while leaning against the tailgate of his pickup truck. Back in the 90s, locals used that road sometimes, he said. Mostly folks who'd lived around here a long time. Holloway asked if he remembered any unusual activity the night Emily disappeared. The man shook his head slowly. No, he said. But there was one guy who drove around those woods a lot. The name came after a long pause. Thomas Grady. The mention of that name did not immediately trigger alarms. Grady had never appeared in the original case file as a suspect. In fact, his name appeared only once in the earliest investigation reports, and even then it had been dismissed as irrelevant. But Holloway was intrigued. Grady lived less than 3 miles from the road where Emily's car had been found. He owned a small house on the edge of forest land and had spent most of his life working as a mechanic. Neighbors described him as quiet, somewhat withdrawn, but generally polite. Nothing about his background suggested violent behavior. No criminal record. No history of arrests. No documented connection to Emily Carter. Still, Holloway kept digging. Old vehicle registration records revealed something interesting. In 1998, Grady owned a pickup truck. Dark green. Older model. One cracked tail light listed in a maintenance report. Holloway stared at the document for several minutes. The description matched the same vehicle a delivery driver had mentioned years earlier when describing a suspicious truck seen near the diner on the night Emily disappeared. But the lead had never been pursued fully.
Why?
Because back then, the investigation had focused on strangers passing through town. Grady lived locally. No witness had identified him as the man from the diner. And without that connection, his truck was simply one of dozens investigators examined during the early stages of the case. Still, the coincidence felt unsettling. Holloway decided to speak with Grady directly. The house sat at the end of a gravel driveway surrounded by tall pines. A faded mailbox leaned slightly toward the road. The place looked quiet, almost forgotten. Grady answered the door slowly. He appeared older than his age, gray hair, weathered skin, cautious eyes that studied Holloway carefully when the detective introduced himself. When asked about Emily Carter's disappearance, Grady reacted the way many residents had over the years.
He sighed.
"Yeah," he said softly. "I remember that girl going missing." Holloway asked where he had been the night she vanished. Grady shrugged. "At home, probably," he said. "That was a long time ago." The answer wasn't unusual. After so many years, few people could recall precise details about a random night in 1998. Still, Holloway noticed something small. Grady seemed nervous. Not overtly frightened. Not hostile. Just uneasy. The detective asked if Grady had ever visited the diner where Emily worked. "Sure," he replied. "Everybody went there." Did he remember being there the night she disappeared? Grady shook his head slowly. "Can't say I do." The interview ended without confrontation. Holloway thanked him and left. On the drive back to town, the detective replayed the conversation in his mind. There had been no confession. No clear lie. No evidence connecting Grady to the crime. But the uneasy feeling remained. Later that evening, Holloway reviewed the old diner surveillance footage again. The grainy image of the man in the corner booth flickered across the screen. A baseball cap. Broad shoulders. A man sitting quietly, watching. The face was still impossible to identify. But something about the posture looked familiar. Holloway leaned closer to the monitor. The man shifted slightly in his seat, reaching for his coffee cup. And for just a fraction of a second, his sleeve lifted enough to reveal something small on his wrist. A metal watch.
Plain.
Wide band. Holloway paused the frame. It was a tiny detail, almost meaningless. But the next morning, he checked the photograph taken during his interview with Thomas Grady. The same style watch sat loosely around the man's wrist. It could have been coincidence. Thousands of people owned similar watches. But for the first time in years, the cold case file surrounding Emily Carter felt like it might contain something new. Something real. Because somewhere inside those faded reports and grainy photographs, a possibility had begun to take shape. The person responsible for her disappearance might not have been a stranger passing through town. He might have been living quietly in the same forest all along. Just a few miles from the road where Emily Carter vanished on that rainy night in Oregon. Detective Mark Holloway did not rush back to Thomas Grady's house. In cold cases, impatience can destroy the only chance of uncovering the truth. 26 years of silence had already settled over Emily Carter's disappearance. Another few weeks of quiet observation would not change that. Instead, Holloway did something experienced investigators often rely on when a case begins to shift direction. He started watching. Grady's property sat on the edge of forest land outside town, where the trees thickened and houses grew farther apart. From the road, the place looked unremarkable: an aging single-story house, a detached garage, stacks of cut firewood leaning against a fence. A pickup truck usually sat in the gravel driveway. The same dark green pickup truck Holloway had seen listed in old registration records. During the late 1990s, Neighbors occasionally saw that truck driving through the forest roads at night. At the time, no one considered it unusual. Many residents in rural parts of Oregon used those roads for hunting, checking traps, or simply taking long drives through the woods. But now, viewed through the lens of Emily Carter's disappearance, those nighttime drives looked different. Holloway began speaking quietly with residents who had lived near Grady during that period. Memories were faded, but fragments remained. One neighbor remembered seeing Grady return home very late on several nights back in the late 90s. Another recalled the pickup truck occasionally covered in mud, as if it had been driven far off paved roads. None of those details proved anything. Rural life often involved mud, long drives, and late hours. Still, Holloway wrote everything down. The deeper he dug, the stranger the pattern became. Thomas Grady had lived in the same small house for nearly 30 years. Before retiring, he worked as a mechanic at a local repair shop. Coworkers described him as quiet but reliable. He rarely spoke about his personal life. He never married. He kept mostly to himself. In many ways, he was the kind of man people barely noticed. And sometimes, investigators know, that's exactly what allows dangerous secrets to remain hidden. Holloway requested permission to review old employment records from the repair shop where Grady once worked. The paperwork revealed something interesting. Grady often volunteered for late-night shifts. The garage occasionally stayed open past midnight to service long-haul trucks passing through the region. During those years, Grady frequently worked alone during those hours, which meant he was used to being awake late at night, used to driving empty roads, used to moving through darkness without drawing attention. Still, none of that placed him directly at the diner the night Emily Carter vanished. Holloway needed something stronger, something that moved beyond suspicion. He returned again to the earliest interviews conducted in 1998. Hundreds of pages of statements from customers who had been inside the diner that night. Most witnesses had described the mysterious man in vague terms. Older, quiet, watching Emily. But one statement stood out. A truck driver named Leon Patterson had mentioned something unusual in his interview. At the time, investigators dismissed the detail because it seemed insignificant. But now, decades later, Holloway read the words more carefully. Patterson had written, "The guy in the booth smelled like motor oil. Strong smell, like he'd just come from working on an engine." Holloway leaned back in his chair. Motor oil. A mechanic's scent. Of course, that alone meant nothing. Plenty of people worked around engines. Farmers, truck drivers, construction workers. But Grady had spent most of his life repairing vehicles. And if he had come directly from work that night, it might explain why the truck driver noticed the smell. Holloway checked one more record from October 1998. The repair shop's shift schedule. Thomas Grady had worked until 11:45 p.m. the night Emily disappeared. The diner where Emily worked closed shortly after midnight. The timeline fit perfectly. Holloway stared at the documents for several long minutes. For the first time in decades, the cold case surrounding Emily Carter was beginning to form a shape. A man who worked late nights. A man who knew the forest roads. A man who owned a truck matching the one seen near the diner. And a man who lived only a few miles from where Emily's abandoned car had been discovered. Still, suspicion was not evidence. Investigators needed something tangible. Something that connected Grady directly to the crime. The breakthrough came from a place no one expected. In 2019, forensic technology had advanced dramatically. Across the country, detectives were reopening long unsolved cases using modern DNA analysis. Tiny fragments of biological material once considered useless could now reveal information investigators had never imagined possible. Holloway requested a full forensic re-examination of the evidence collected from Emily's car. Technicians carefully reopened sealed containers that had not been touched for years. The car's interior was processed again under modern laboratory conditions. Specialists examined fibers, dust particles, and microscopic debris. Most of the evidence produced nothing new. But one item caught attention. A partial fingerprint recovered years earlier from the inside edge of the driver's door. At the time, the print had been considered too incomplete to identify. But new digital enhancement techniques allowed technicians to reconstruct more detail from the ridges. Within weeks, the print was entered into national databases. Investigators did not expect a match. Grady had no criminal history. His fingerprints were not stored in any system. Still, the improved image revealed something important. The fingerprint clearly did not belong to Emily Carter, which meant someone else had touched the inside of her car door shortly before she disappeared. That discovery alone did not identify the suspect, but it confirmed something detectives had long suspected. Emily Carter had not simply left her vehicle and walked away. Someone else had been there. Someone whose presence had never been explained. Holloway's focus returned once again to Thomas Grady. Over the following months, investigators quietly monitored his routine. They watched his daily habits. They documented his movements. They reviewed decades of property records, vehicle ownership documents, and financial activity. Grady's life appeared ordinary, almost painfully ordinary. He woke early. He drove into town for groceries. He spent time working in his garage. Sometimes he took long walks along nearby forest trails. The same quiet routines he had followed for years. Yet the longer detectives observed him, the more unsettling one fact became. Grady never left the area. Not once. In nearly 3 decades, records showed he had rarely traveled farther than the nearest city. The forest roads around his home had remained his entire world. And one of those roads led directly to the place where Emily Carter's car had been found. Still, Holloway understood the danger of building a theory too quickly. Cold cases often lure investigators toward suspects who appear to fit the story. But appearances can deceive. He needed something undeniable. Then, one evening, an unexpected phone call arrived at the sheriff's office. The voice on the other end belonged to an elderly woman who had lived near Grady's property in the late 1990s. She had seen news coverage about renewed interest in Emily Carter's disappearance. And suddenly, something from the past had begun to bother her. "There's something I never told the police," she said slowly. Holloway felt the familiar tightening in his chest that detectives recognize instantly. A new detail. Possibly the one detail the case had been missing for more than 20 years. The woman continued speaking carefully, as if the memory itself made her uneasy. "Back around the time that girl disappeared," she said, "I remember hearing a car drive past my house very late one night. That wasn't unusual. Forest roads sometimes carried traffic at odd hours. But then she said something else. I looked out the window," she explained quietly, "and I saw headlights turn down that old logging road. The same road where Emily's abandoned sedan had been discovered." Holloway asked what made the memory stand out after all these years. The woman paused. "Because the truck stopped for a moment right in front of my driveway," she said. "And when it drove away, the driver turned toward the forest." Holloway's voice remained calm as he asked the final question. "Did you see the driver?" Another long silence followed. Then the woman spoke again. "I couldn't see his face clearly," she admitted, "but I remember the truck." Holloway's pen hovered over his notebook. "What kind of truck?" Her answer came quietly. "Dark green," she said. "The same one that belonged to Thomas Grady." For more than 2 decades, the disappearance of Emily Carter existed as a quiet wound in the small communities scattered through the forests of Oregon. The case had been passed from detective to detective, from one generation of investigators to the next, each inheriting the same file thick with unanswered questions. People had grown older. Witnesses had moved away. Some had died. But the truth behind that rainy night in 1998 still lingered somewhere beyond reach. Now, suddenly, the past was moving again. The elderly woman's statement about the dark green pickup truck changed the atmosphere inside the sheriff's office almost immediately. For the first time, a witness had placed a vehicle matching Thomas Grady's truck near the forest road on the night Emily Carter vanished. It wasn't a direct identification of Grady himself, but the details sharpened the growing picture investigators had been quietly assembling. Detective Mark Holloway knew the importance of moving carefully. In cold cases, excitement can lead to mistakes. Evidence must be verified. Memories must be tested against time. But this new statement could not be ignored. Investigators reopened interviews with several residents who had lived along those rural roads in the late 1990s. Some struggled to recall anything useful. 26 years can erode even the clearest memories. But occasionally, a fragment surfaced, small details that seemed insignificant at the time, yet carried new weight now. One man remembered hearing an engine late that same night. Another recalled seeing headlights moving through the trees near the logging road shortly after midnight. None of them had thought much about it back then. Forest communities often hear vehicles traveling in darkness. It rarely means anything. But when those recollections were layered together with a timeline from the diner, something unsettling appeared. Emily Carter left work shortly after midnight. The mysterious man in the diner booth left moments later. And sometime after that, a dark green pickup truck drove toward the forest road where her car would eventually be discovered. The sequence was no longer just coincidence. Still, investigators needed more than circumstantial alignment. They needed something physical, something that tied Thomas Grady directly to Emily Carter's disappearance. That opportunity came from a surprising direction. In early 2020, the county sheriff's department partnered with a regional forensic laboratory that specialized in advanced evidence recovery. Cold cases across the country were being revisited with new techniques capable of extracting microscopic traces from old materials. Evidence that had once been considered useless was now revealing hidden information. Detective Holloway requested that technicians examine the fiber recovered years earlier from the passenger seat of Emily's car. The fiber had been stored carefully inside an evidence envelope since the original investigation. Back then, technology had been too limited to determine its origin. It was simply identified as wool, dark-colored, possibly from a heavy coat or jacket. Now, modern spectrographic analysis could do far more. The lab processed the sample using high-resolution fiber comparison systems. Specialists examined its chemical composition, weave pattern, and dye characteristics. Several weeks later, the report arrived. The fiber came from a specific type of wool blend used in work jackets manufactured during the late 1990s. These jackets were commonly worn by mechanics, construction workers, and outdoor laborers. But one detail stood out. The dye used in the fiber had a unique chemical signature tied to a limited production batch manufactured between 1996 and 1999. Only a small number of those jackets had been sold in the region. Holloway studied the report carefully. If Thomas Grady had owned one of those jackets, and if that jacket had shed the fiber found in Emily's car, it could place him inside her vehicle at some point. Investigators needed to confirm whether Grady had ever owned such clothing. But they faced a problem. After more than 20 years, any jacket he might have worn in 1998 could easily have been discarded or destroyed. Still, Holloway decided to try. He returned to Grady's property again, this time with a different approach. The visit appeared casual. Just another follow-up conversation about the old investigation. Grady seemed calm when he answered the door, though the same faint uneasiness lingered in his expression. Holloway asked routine questions about life in the late 1990s. Work schedules, vehicles he had owned, places he used to visit around town. Eventually, the conversation drifted toward clothing worn during those years. Working as a mechanic, Holloway said lightly, "You probably went through a lot of jackets." Grady shrugged. "Sure," he replied. "Cold winters out here." "Do you remember what kind you used to wear?" Grady hesitated slightly. "Just regular work coats," he said. "Nothing special." Holloway nodded casually. "Still have any of them?" Grady shook his head. "Not that old," he answered. "Most of that stuff wore out years ago." The answer sounded reasonable. Clothing rarely lasts decades in a mechanic's shop. Still, Holloway noticed something small again. Grady avoided eye contact when discussing the jacket. The conversation ended without confrontation. But when Holloway returned to the sheriff's office, he began reviewing old photographs taken during earlier interactions with Grady. One image caught his attention. It had been taken in 2001 during a neighborhood barbecue, several years after Emily's disappearance. In the background of the photo, Thomas Grady stood near a picnic table. He was wearing a dark wool work jacket, the same style described in the forensic report. Holloway enlarged the image on his computer screen. The picture quality was poor, but the jacket's collar and stitching pattern looked similar to the type produced during the limited manufacturing batch identified by the lab. It wasn't proof, but it was another piece of the puzzle. Investigators began quietly reviewing additional photographs from community events, local newspapers, and social gatherings where Grady might have appeared during the late 1990s and early 2000s. Several images surfaced. In at least 2 of them, Grady wore the same heavy wool jacket. If the fiber found in Emily's car came from that garment, it would mean one thing. At some point, Thomas Grady had been close enough to her vehicle for fibers from his clothing to transfer onto the passenger seat. But how? Had he ridden in the car? Had he leaned inside? Or had something far darker happened that night on the forest road? Meanwhile, investigators continued observing Grady's daily routine. The quiet mechanic who had lived unnoticed for decades remained largely the same. He spent long hours alone in his garage. Occasionally, he drove into town for groceries or supplies. He spoke politely with neighbors, but rarely engaged in long conversations. Nothing about his behavior suggested the kind of violent secret investigators feared he might be hiding. And yet the evidence surrounding Emily Carter's disappearance was slowly beginning to point toward him. The mysterious diner visitor, the dark green pickup truck, the knowledge of remote forest roads, and now a fiber that might have come from a jacket he once wore. The cold case was no longer frozen. It was beginning to thaw. But even as detectives felt the investigation moving closer to something real, a deeper question remained unanswered. If Thomas Grady was responsible for what happened to Emily Carter, how had he managed to keep that secret for more than 26 years? Because the forests of Oregon hold many hiding places. And sometimes the truth stays buried, not just in the wilderness, but inside the quiet life of the person who put it there. For 26 years, the disappearance of Emily Carter existed as a mystery suspended in silence. No body.
No weapon. No confession.
Just a lonely car abandoned on a forest road and a question that never stopped echoing through the small communities of Oregon. But by the spring of 2021, something inside the investigation had changed. The case was no longer drifting in darkness. It was narrowing, slowly, carefully, toward one quiet house on the edge of the woods. Thomas Grady. The man had lived almost invisibly in the community for decades. A retired mechanic, soft-spoken, polite with neighbors, rarely involved in anything that might draw attention. If someone had asked residents to name the most likely person connected to a violent crime, Grady would never have been mentioned. Yet the deeper investigators looked, the more the threads of the case seemed to twist back toward him. Detective Mark Holloway knew suspicion alone could not solve a cold case. The pieces forming around Grady needed to be supported by something undeniable. Physical evidence. A timeline that held together. A mistake the suspect had made years earlier, without realizing it. And somewhere in the past, Holloway believed that mistake existed. He returned again to the original search reports from 1998. Hundreds of pages describing every location investigators had examined during the frantic days following Emily Carter's disappearance. The teams had covered enormous ground. Riverbanks, hiking trails, abandoned logging roads, even the shallow caves scattered throughout the surrounding hills. But as Holloway studied the maps again, he noticed something subtle. The search grids avoided a large section of private property. That land belonged to Thomas Grady. Back in 1998, investigators had briefly considered searching the area. But without probable cause or a clear connection between Grady and the crime, the request had never been pursued. At the time, the investigation was focused heavily on strangers passing through town. A local mechanic with no criminal record did not attract attention. Now, more than 2 decades later, that decision suddenly looked significant. If Emily Carter had been taken to a location hidden within those woods, it might have remained undiscovered simply because no one had ever searched there. Holloway brought the idea to the district attorney's office. Convincing prosecutors to reopen a case this old required careful preparation. Every new lead had to be documented thoroughly. The fiber evidence. The witness statement about the dark green pickup truck. the mechanic's late shift at the repair shop the night Emily disappeared. Each piece alone was weak. Together, they formed something closer to probable cause. Weeks of legal review followed. Finally, a judge approved a limited search warrant for Grady's property and the surrounding acreage he owned. The warrant allowed investigators to examine structures, vehicles, and specific areas of land where evidence related to Emily Carter's disappearance might be located. The search began early on a cold morning in November. Gray clouds hung low over the forest as investigators arrived at the property. Patrol vehicles lined the gravel road. Forensic technicians unloaded equipment from vans. Search teams prepared ground-penetrating radar devices capable of detecting disturbances beneath soil. Thomas Grady stood quietly on his front porch as detectives approached. He looked confused, almost frightened. When Holloway presented the warrant, Grady's hands trembled slightly as he accepted the document. "You think she's here?" he asked quietly. Holloway did not answer directly. "We're going to take a look around," the detective said. Grady nodded slowly and stepped aside. The search team spread across the property. The house itself revealed little. Inside, investigators found the same ordinary life Grady had lived for decades: tools neatly arranged in the garage, stacks of repair manuals, shelves of canned food in the kitchen pantry. Nothing connected directly to Emily Carter. But the land behind the house was different. The property stretched deep into forest land, covering several acres of thick pine and underbrush. Narrow trails wound through the trees, likely created over years of walking and hunting. Search teams moved carefully. Ground-penetrating radar scanned sections of earth near the edges of the clearing. The machine sent pulses beneath the surface, mapping disturbances where soil had once been dug or shifted. Hours passed. The radar revealed several anomalies. Most turned out to be tree roots or natural rock formations. Then, near the far edge of the property, the device detected something else. A patch of ground roughly 6 feet long. The soil beneath it had clearly been disturbed at some point in the past. Investigators marked the location with bright orange flags. Holloway felt the quiet tension spread through the search team. Moments like this often carried enormous emotional weight. Sometimes the ground revealed nothing more than buried debris. Other times it uncovered the truth investigators had been chasing for years. Forensic technicians began digging carefully. Layer by layer, they removed soil from the marked area. At first, nothing appeared. Then a shovel struck something hard. The team paused. Carefully brushing away dirt, they revealed a fragment of fabric. Dark. Decayed. The color almost completely faded after decades underground. The digging continued slowly. More fragments surfaced, pieces of clothing, rusted metal objects, and something else that made several investigators step back in silence. Human bones. The remains were incomplete, but unmistakable. The forest had hidden them for more than 2 decades. For a long moment, no one spoke. Detective Holloway stared at the shallow grave, feeling the weight of 26 years pressing down on that quiet patch of earth. Emily Carter had finally been found. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community. News spread quickly across local television stations and online reports. After decades of uncertainty, the missing woman from 1998 had been located. But the most shocking part was still unfolding, because the remains had been buried less than 300 yards from Thomas Grady's back door. The quiet mechanic who had lived unnoticed beside those woods for decades suddenly became the center of a case that had haunted the region for a generation. Grady himself sat silently in a patrol car while investigators continued their work. He had not resisted. He had not attempted to run. But the calm expression he had worn for years was gone now. In its place was something far more fragile. Fear. The forensic process would take time. Specialists needed to confirm the identity of the remains through DNA testing. Every piece of evidence surrounding the grave had to be documented carefully. But for the first time since October 1998, investigators could say something they had never been able to say before. Emily Carter was no longer missing. She had been buried in the woods of Oregon all along. And the man who had lived beside those woods for decades was now sitting in the back of a police vehicle, watching the forest give up a secret it had protected for more than 26 years. The forest was silent as the excavation continued. Pine branches swayed gently in the cold wind, scattering needles across the disturbed soil. The search teams worked slowly, methodically, documenting every fragment uncovered from the shallow grave behind Thomas Grady's house in the remote woods of Oregon. For the investigators standing there that morning, the moment carried the weight of decades. For 26 years, Emily Carter had been a missing person. A photograph on posters. A name repeated in news reports. A daughter who never came home. Now the earth itself was beginning to tell the story. The remains were fragile after so many years underground. Forensic specialists carefully brushed away soil, exposing bones that had rested beneath the forest floor since the fall of 1998. Pieces of clothing lay tangled in the dirt beside them, fabric darkened and weakened by time. Detective Mark Holloway stood just beyond the excavation line, watching quietly. He had imagined this moment many times during the investigation. The day when the case would finally shift from theory to proof. But seeing the reality unfold was different. It felt heavier, more personal. A young woman's life had ended here. Not on a distant highway. Not in some unknown location beyond the reach of the investigation. Right here, 300 yards from the back door of a man who had spent decades living quietly beside the same forest. As forensic technicians continued working, investigators searched the surrounding area for additional evidence. Metal detectors swept across the soil. Photographs were taken from every angle. Even the smallest objects could hold critical clues. Soon they found something else. A rusted metal clasp buried a few inches from the remains. When it was carefully removed and cleaned, the shape became recognizable. A broken watch band. Holloway felt a quiet chill run through him. The diner surveillance footage from 1998 had shown the mysterious man in the corner booth wearing a wide metal watch. During Holloway's first interview with Thomas Grady, the same style watch had been visible on his wrist. Now a damaged metal band lay in the grave beside Emily Carter's remains. The evidence was growing heavier by the minute. Meanwhile, Thomas Grady sat inside a patrol vehicle parked near the house. Officers watched him carefully, but he remained still, staring out through the windshield toward the forest. For decades, he had lived with whatever secret existed beneath those trees. Now the secret was slowly rising into daylight. Investigators decided it was time to bring him inside for questioning. The interview took place later that afternoon at the county sheriff's office. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of fluorescent lights. A recorder clicked softly as detectives prepared to begin. Grady looked older than he had during their earlier conversation. His shoulders slumped forward. His hands rested on the table, fingers slightly trembling. Detective Holloway sat across from him. For several moments, neither man spoke. Finally, Holloway placed a photograph on the table. It showed the shallow grave behind Grady's house. "Thomas," Holloway said calmly, "we found her." Grady stared at the photograph. His breathing grew heavier. But he did not speak. Another photograph appeared beside the first, an image of the broken metal watch band recovered from the soil. "You remember that night in 1998, Holloway continued quietly. "You were at the diner." Grady closed his eyes briefly. Still no answer. Holloway leaned forward slightly. "We know you worked late that night at the garage," he said. "We know a truck matching yours was seen near the diner. And now we've found Emily Carter buried on your land." The silence in the room deepened. Outside, investigators continued processing evidence from the property. Forensic teams documented every detail of the burial site. The case that had remained frozen for decades was now unfolding rapidly. Inside the interview room, Grady finally spoke. His voice was barely louder than a whisper. "I didn't mean to hurt her." The words hung in the air. Detective Holloway did not interrupt. Grady stared down at the table as if seeing something far away. "She was leaving the diner," he continued slowly. "I'd seen her there before. She was always smiling, always talking to people." His voice cracked slightly. "I just wanted to talk." Holloway remained still, allowing the confession to unfold. Grady described following Emily's car when she left the diner that night. He claimed he intended only to speak with her, nothing more. But when he signaled for her to pull over on the quiet forest road, the encounter quickly spiraled out of control. Emily had been frightened. She tried to drive away. Grady blocked her car with his truck. When she stepped out of the vehicle, the argument escalated. She screamed, he said quietly. I panicked. The details came slowly, painfully. Grady admitted grabbing her during the struggle. In the chaos, he struck her head against the side of the car. The impact left her unconscious. At first, he believed she might still be alive. He carried her into the forest, hoping to hide her until she woke up. But she never did. The realization terrified him. Instead of calling for help, he made a decision that would define the next 26 years of his life. He buried her. The confession continued for nearly an hour. Every word filled gaps investigators had struggled to explain for decades. The scuff marks beside the car door. The missing person who vanished without a trace. The abandoned vehicle on the roadside. When the recording finally stopped, the room fell silent again. Thomas Grady sat motionless, staring at the table as if the weight of the years had suddenly crashed down upon him. Outside the sheriff's office, news crews had begun gathering. Word of the discovery spread rapidly across the region. Residents who remembered Emily Carter watched the reports in disbelief. The quiet mechanic who had lived unnoticed for decades had finally admitted the truth. But even as investigators prepared formal charges, a deeper realization settled over the case. For 26 years, the man responsible for Emily Carter's death had lived peacefully inside the same community that mourned her disappearance. He had driven the same roads, shopped at the same stores, nodded politely to neighbors who never suspected the secret buried just beyond his backyard. The cold case that had haunted the forests of Oregon was no longer a mystery. But the truth behind it was far more disturbing than anyone had imagined. The confession did not bring relief. Not the kind people imagine when a mystery finally breaks open after decades of silence. Inside the sheriff's office that night, there was no sense of celebration, no triumphant moment where the weight of the past simply vanished. Instead, the truth settled over the investigation like cold fog rolling through the forests of Oregon. Because solving a case after 26 years means confronting everything that was lost during those years. Detective Mark Holloway stepped outside the station long after sunset. The air carried the sharp smell of rain and pine. Across the street, news vans had gathered, their satellite dishes pointed toward the dark sky. Reporters spoke quietly into cameras, repeating the story that had stunned the community. Emily Carter, missing since 1998, finally found. And the man responsible had been living quietly nearby the entire time. Inside the building, investigators continued documenting every detail of Thomas Grady's confession. The recording equipment captured his voice in steady, hollow tones as he described the events of that night with disturbing clarity. He said he had first noticed Emily months before the disappearance. She worked the late shift at the diner, friendly with everyone, always smiling. He watched her from the same booth on several nights, saying little, drinking coffee, while observing the room. To him, those quiet visits had felt harmless. But over time, something darker began to form in his mind. He convinced himself that speaking to her would somehow change his life, that she would understand him in a way no one else ever had. So on the night of October 17, 1998, when his shift at the repair shop ended just before midnight, he drove to the diner again. He sat in the corner booth, watched her move between tables, waited. When Emily finally stepped outside and walked toward her car, he followed. The confession painted a slow, chilling picture of obsession that had grown silently in the background of an ordinary town. Grady described driving behind her through the quiet streets until she turned onto the road leading out of town. He flashed his headlights several times, hoping she would stop. Eventually she did. The narrow forest road where she pulled over was one he knew well. He had driven it many times while hunting or exploring the woods. That familiarity had given him confidence. He approached her car expecting a simple conversation. But the moment Emily realized she was alone on that road with a stranger, panic took over. She demanded he leave. She tried to drive away. And in the chaos that followed, everything spiraled beyond control. Grady claimed he never intended to kill her, but the violence of the struggle told a different story. When he grabbed her arm, she fought back fiercely. The impact that struck her head against a vehicle happened in seconds. One sudden blow. One moment of terror. Then silence. When he realized she was no longer breathing, he panicked. The forest around him felt endless and empty. Instead of calling for help, he made the choice that would trap him inside a secret for the rest of his life. He carried her body deeper into the woods behind his property and buried her there. The confession explained details investigators had puzzled over for decades. The scuff marks in the gravel beside the driver's door. The abandoned car left behind as if someone had simply vanished. Grady admitted returning to the scene briefly the next morning. He wiped down parts of the vehicle in a desperate attempt to remove fingerprints. But fear drove him away quickly. He abandoned the car where it sat and drove home before sunrise. After that, he said he tried to forget. But forgetting was impossible. Every time news reports mentioned Emily Carter's disappearance, the memory returned. Search helicopters flying over the forest. Volunteers walking through the woods not far from where he had buried her. He watched those search teams from a distance, always afraid they would find the grave. But they never did. Years passed. The case faded from headlines. And Grady continued living the same quiet life he had always lived. He repaired engines. He visited grocery stores. He waved politely to neighbors who had no idea the secret hidden beneath the trees behind his house. The cold case became something distant, something people talked about only occasionally. But the secret never left him. During the confession, Grady described nights when he could not sleep because he believed someone might finally uncover the truth. Sometimes he walked alone through the woods, standing near the spot where Emily Carter had been buried. "I thought about telling someone," he admitted quietly. But he never did. Instead, the years piled up around him like layers of soil over the grave. Meanwhile, the discovery of Emily's remains had already begun transforming the community. By the following morning, residents gathered near the diner where she had once worked. Flowers appeared along the sidewalk. Some people stood in silence, staring at the building as if trying to reconcile the past with what they had just learned. Many of them remembered Emily personally. They remembered her laughter. They remembered the night she vanished. And now they were learning that the man responsible had been living among them all along. The shock spread far beyond the town itself. Regional news stations replayed images of the quiet house where investigators had uncovered the grave. Photographs of Thomas Grady appeared on television screens beside pictures of Emily Carter from 1998. Two lives forever connected by a crime hidden in the forests of Oregon. Back inside the sheriff's office, the legal process moved forward carefully. Prosecutors reviewed the confession alongside the growing collection of physical evidence recovered from the property. The broken watch band, the clothing fragments, the location of the burial site only yards from Grady's home. And most importantly, the remains themselves. Forensic specialists had already begun the process of confirming identity through DNA comparison with Emily's surviving family members. Even though investigators were confident they had found her, the confirmation would carry enormous emotional weight. For more than 26 years, Emily Carter's family had lived with uncertainty. Now, they were finally approaching the truth. Detective Holloway stood quietly in the hallway outside the interview room, listening to the muffled voices inside as detectives continued questioning Grady about small details from the past. The cold case that had once seemed impossible to solve was now unfolding piece by piece. But Holloway understood something important. Justice in cases like this never arrives cleanly. It arrives late. It arrives heavy. And it arrives with the knowledge that time cannot be reversed. Emily Carter would never walk out of that diner again. She would never grow older, never build the life she had once imagined. The confession had answered the central mystery. But it had also revealed something darker about the nature of secrets. For 26 years, a man had carried the truth alone. And all that time, The forest remained silent, waiting, holding its secret beneath layers of earth and fallen leaves until the day investigators finally returned with the tools and the determination to make the ground speak. The confirmation came quietly, almost gently, as if the truth itself understood the weight it carried. Several weeks after the excavation behind Thomas Grady's property, the forensic laboratory delivered the final report. DNA extracted from the skeletal remains had been compared with samples provided by Emily Carter's surviving family members. The match was absolute. After 26 years, the missing woman whose photograph had stared out from posters and newspaper pages was finally identified. Emily Carter had been found. The announcement spread quickly through the towns and rural communities scattered across the forests of Oregon. For many residents, the news felt surreal. A case that had once seemed destined to remain unsolved had suddenly revealed its answer, buried beneath pine trees only a few miles from where people had lived their daily lives. But while the mystery had been solved, the emotional shock was only beginning. Emily's family received the news privately first. Detective Mark Holloway traveled with 2 other investigators to deliver the confirmation in person. It was something law enforcement officials often insisted on doing face-to-face. After decades of uncertainty, the moment deserved more than a phone call. The house looked almost exactly the same as it had in old photographs from the late 1990s. A small porch, flower pots near the steps. The quiet kind of home where ordinary lives unfold year after year. Emily's mother answered the door. Time had changed her face, but the detectives recognized her immediately from the many interviews she had given during the early years of the search. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Holloway told her the truth. They had found Emily. The words seemed to echo inside the room long after they were spoken. For decades, the family had lived suspended between hope and dread. Every tip, every rumor, every anniversary of the disappearance reopened the same question. Was she alive somewhere? Or had something terrible happened the night she vanished? Now the uncertainty was gone. In its place came a different kind of pain. Emily Carter had not run away. She had not disappeared into another life. She had been taken from the world on a quiet forest road and hidden in the woods behind a man's house. Her mother sat silently as Holloway explained what investigators had discovered. The grave behind Thomas Grady's property, the confession, the evidence that finally connected the case to the man who had lived quietly beside the forest all those years. Tears filled her eyes, but her voice remained steady. "I knew," she whispered. Holloway looked up. "After so many years," she continued softly, "you start to feel it. A mother knows when her child isn't coming home." Outside the house, the wind rustled through trees that had grown taller during the decades Emily had been missing. Inside the sheriff's office, the case continued moving toward trial. Thomas Grady had been formally charged with murder and unlawful disposal of human remains. Prosecutors carefully constructed the timeline that would be presented in court. Every detail from the investigation had to be documented precisely. The diner, the dark green pickup truck, the abandoned car on the forest road, the shallow grave hidden behind his property, and finally, the confession itself. Grady remained in custody as legal proceedings advanced. During interviews with his defense attorney, he appeared exhausted, almost hollowed out by the sudden collapse of the secret he had carried for so long. For more than 2 decades, he had managed to live a quiet life beneath the surface of the community. Now the past had returned with overwhelming force. News coverage continued spreading across regional and national outlets. Reporters revisited the story that had once baffled investigators. The cold case from 1998. The young woman who vanished after leaving her job at a diner. The lonely forest road where her car had been found. And the quiet mechanic who had lived only miles away the entire time. For many people in the community, the revelation triggered a strange mix of emotions. Relief, shock, and something darker, an unsettling realization about how easily evil can hide behind ordinary appearances. Neighbors who had known Thomas Grady for years spoke to reporters with disbelief. He seemed like a normal guy, one man said outside a grocery store. Quiet, sure, but normal. Another neighbor described seeing him occasionally working in his garage late at night. "Never thought anything about it," she said. "Now I keep wondering what he was thinking all those years." The truth was something no one could fully understand. For 26 years, Grady had woken each morning knowing exactly what had happened on that forest road. He had walked through his daily routines carrying a secret that connected him forever to the disappearance haunting the community. And all that time, the evidence remained buried in the woods behind his house. Detective Holloway often thought about that strange contrast. Two lives unfolding side by side. Emily Carter's life ending abruptly on a cold October night in 1998, and Thomas Grady's continuing quietly, almost invisibly, through the decades that followed, until the ground beneath the forest finally revealed the truth. As winter approached again in Oregon, preparations for the trial moved forward. Prosecutors reviewed forensic reports, witness statements, and the recorded confession. Defense attorneys examined every detail, searching for weaknesses in the case. But the evidence had become difficult to challenge. The grave was on Grady's land. The remains were identified as Emily Carter, and the man who had buried her had admitted exactly how it happened. Still, even with the legal process moving toward resolution, something about the case lingered in the minds of investigators and residents alike. Because cold cases do not simply end when they are solved. They leave behind echoes. For 26 years, people had wondered what happened to Emily Carter. They had imagined strangers passing through town, dangerous criminals hiding somewhere far away. Few had imagined the truth waiting quietly in a small house near the forest. But that is often how cold cases end. Not with a dramatic chase. Not with a sudden revelation. But with the slow uncovering of a secret that had been hiding in plain sight all along. And now, after nearly 3 decades, the mystery that once haunted the forests of Oregon was finally approaching its final chapter. A courtroom, a verdict, and the last pieces of a story that began with a young woman driving home from work on a rainy night in 1998. The courtroom felt smaller than anyone expected. When the trial of Thomas Grady finally began, the room filled quickly with reporters, investigators, and residents from the small communities scattered through the forests of Oregon. Some had known Emily Carter personally. Others had followed the mystery of her disappearance for decades. Now they sat quietly on wooden benches, waiting to watch the final chapter unfold. At the front of the room, Grady sat beside his defense attorney. His shoulders were slightly hunched, his gray hair thinner than it had been in photographs from the late 1990s. The quiet mechanic who once blended easily into the background of the town now carried the full weight of a crime that had haunted the region for 26 years. Across the aisle, Emily's family sat together. Time had changed them too. Faces lined with age and grief, but also with something else now, certainty. For decades they had lived with questions that never stopped echoing in their minds. Now, they knew the truth, and they were here to hear it spoken aloud. The prosecution began by reconstructing the night of October 17, 1998. The jurors listened carefully as the timeline unfolded piece by piece. Emily Carter finishing her shift at the diner shortly after midnight. The mysterious older man sitting in the corner booth. The blue sedan leaving the parking lot. And moments later, a dark green pickup truck pulling onto the road behind her. Witnesses testified about the diner that night. A former coworker described seeing Emily step outside beneath the flickering parking lot lights. A truck driver recalled the quiet man who had sat alone drinking coffee and watching the room. The prosecution then introduced the grainy surveillance footage that investigators had studied for decades. The image flickered across a courtroom monitor. A shadowy figure in a baseball cap, standing up from the booth, walking slowly toward the exit, following Emily Carter into the darkness. The footage alone could not prove identity, but it set the stage for everything that followed. Next came the physical evidence. Forensic specialists described the abandoned car found on the forest road. They explained the scuff marks discovered beside the open driver's door, signs that suggested a struggle had taken place. Then the courtroom grew even quieter as investigators described the discovery made behind Thomas Grady's home. Photographs of the excavation site appeared on the screen. A shallow grave in the woods. fragments of clothing recovered from the soil, and the skeletal remains that had finally been identified as Emily Carter through DNA testing. Some jurors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The evidence had transformed a decades-old mystery into something stark and undeniable. But the most powerful moment came when the prosecution played the recording of Grady's confession. His voice echoed through the courtroom speakers, soft, tired, almost distant. "I didn't mean to hurt her," he said. The jurors listened as he described following Emily from the diner, flashing his headlights until she pulled onto the forest road. They heard him explain the confrontation beside her car, the panic when she tried to escape, the violent struggle that ended with her head striking the vehicle. Every detail painted the same grim picture investigators had reconstructed during the investigation. A moment of obsession, a sudden act of violence, and a desperate attempt to hide the truth beneath the forest floor. When the recording ended, the courtroom remained silent for several seconds. The defense attempted to challenge aspects of the confession. They suggested Grady had been exhausted and confused during questioning. They questioned the reliability of memories surrounding events that had occurred more than 2 decades earlier. But the physical evidence remained difficult to explain away. Emily Carter's remains had been buried behind Grady's house, and he had described exactly how they got there. Detective Mark Holloway eventually took the stand. He spoke calmly as he described the long path that led investigators back to the case after so many years. The re-examination of evidence. The witness who remembered seeing a dark green pickup truck driving toward the forest road that night. And finally, the search warrant that led to the discovery of the grave. Holloway explained something the jury seemed to understand immediately. Cold cases rarely break open suddenly. They thaw slowly,
piece by piece.
A forgotten witness. A fiber discovered inside a car. A memory that refuses to stay buried. Until finally the truth surfaces. Across the courtroom, Thomas Grady stared at the table in front of him while the testimony continued. For more than 2 decades, he had lived with the secret alone. Now the entire story was being told in public, detail by detail, before 12 strangers who would soon decide his future. Outside the courthouse, winter clouds drifted slowly over the hills and forests of Oregon. The same forest that had hidden Emily Carter's grave for 26 years now seemed strangely quiet again, as if the land itself had already finished telling its part of the story. The trial lasted several days. Witness after witness repeated the timeline that had finally solved the mystery. The diner, the pickup truck, the forest road, the shallow grave. Each element connected to the next until the chain of events became impossible to ignore. By the time closing arguments arrived, the courtroom felt heavy with anticipation. Prosecutors reminded the jury that justice delayed was still justice. Emily Carter had waited 26 years for someone to speak for her. Now the responsibility rested with the 12 people seated in the jury box. When the jurors left the room to begin deliberations, the courthouse fell into a tense quiet. Families waited in hallways. Reporters prepared for the verdict that would finally end one of the longest-running mysteries the region had ever known. Inside the jury room, 12 strangers examined the story of a rainy night in 1998 and the decades that followed. And somewhere beyond the courthouse walls, the forests of Oregon stood silent once more, no longer guarding the secret they had held for more than a generation. The jury returned just before sunset. Outside the courthouse, the sky above the forests of Oregon had begun to fade into the pale gray light that arrives before evening. The air was cold, and reporters stood quietly along the steps, waiting for the moment that would finally close a chapter that had begun 26 years earlier. Inside the courtroom, every seat was filled. No one spoke as the jurors filed back into their chairs. Thomas Grady sat motionless beside his attorney. His eyes were fixed on the table in front of him, his expression distant, as if the world around him had already begun to fade. Across the aisle, Emily Carter's family held hands. For them, this moment carried a weight no one else in the room could fully understand. For more than 2 decades, they had lived with the same unanswered question that haunted the community. Where was Emily? Now they knew. And they were about to hear the final judgment on the man who had hidden that truth for so long. The judge asked the jury foreperson to stand. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. The verdict was read slowly, clearly.
Guilty.
Guilty of murder. Guilty of unlawful disposal of human remains. The words echoed through the room like the closing of a door that had remained open for nearly 3 decades. Emily's mother lowered her head and began to cry quietly. It was not the loud grief of sudden tragedy. It was something deeper, something shaped by years of waiting and wondering. The verdict did not erase the loss of her daughter, but it ended the silence that had surrounded that loss for so long. Thomas Grady did not react immediately. He remained seated, staring forward as if trying to understand how the life he had lived quietly for decades had finally unraveled. Perhaps part of him had always known this day might come. Secrets buried beneath the earth rarely stay hidden forever. The sentencing hearing followed several weeks later. By then, winter had fully settled across the forests and small towns of Oregon. Snow dusted the hills surrounding the courthouse, and the roads that once carried search teams looking for Emily Carter were quiet again. Inside the courtroom, the judge reviewed the facts of the case. A young woman followed from her workplace. A confrontation on a lonely forest road. A life taken in a moment of violence. And a body hidden beneath the trees for 26 years. When Emily's family was given the opportunity to speak, the room fell completely silent. Her mother stepped forward slowly. She held a photograph taken not long before Emily disappeared, a picture of a smiling 23-year-old woman standing outside the diner where she worked the late shift. For a moment, the courtroom seemed to travel backward in time. Back to the fall of 1998. Back to the last ordinary night before everything changed. "My daughter should have had a life," her mother said quietly. "She should have grown older. She should have had children. She should have had a future." Her voice trembled, but she continued. "For 26 years, we didn't know what happened to her. We didn't know where she was. We didn't know if she suffered." She looked briefly toward Thomas Grady. "But now we know the truth." The judge listened carefully before delivering the sentence. Life imprisonment. No possibility of parole. The courtroom remained silent as the words were spoken. Thomas Grady nodded faintly, as if he had expected nothing else. For the first time since his arrest, he finally looked toward Emily's family. Whatever expression crossed his face in that moment was difficult to read. Regret, exhaustion, or perhaps the realization that the secret he had carried alone for decades had finally reached its end. Outside the courthouse, reporters quickly broadcast the outcome across the region. The cold case that once baffled investigators had finally been resolved. Emily Carter's disappearance was no longer a mystery. But the story did not end in the courtroom. Weeks later, Emily's remains were returned to her family. A small memorial service was held in the town where she had grown up. Friends, neighbors, and former co-workers gathered quietly to say goodbye to the young woman whose life had been frozen in time since 1998. The diner where she once worked closed early that evening. Someone placed flowers near the entrance. Another bouquet appeared along the forest road where her abandoned car had been found all those years ago. For many residents, the story had become more than a crime. It was a reminder of how easily darkness can hide within ordinary lives. Thomas Grady had lived quietly among them for decades. He repaired engines. He waved to neighbors. He walked through the same grocery stores and gas stations as everyone else. And all that time, the truth lay buried beneath the trees behind his house. Now the forest had finally given that truth back. Detective Mark Holloway visited the burial site one last time before winter storms closed the forest roads. The grave had been carefully restored after the investigation ended. Pine needles covered the ground again. Wind moved softly through the tall trees. Standing there, Holloway thought about the long journey that had led investigators back to this quiet place. A cold case file sitting untouched for years. A forgotten witness remembering headlights on a dark road. A fiber inside an abandoned car. Small fragments of the past slowly guiding the investigation toward the truth. Cold cases rarely solve themselves. They wait, sometimes for decades. They wait for someone willing to look again, to question old assumptions, to follow the faintest clues through time. And sometimes, when patience and determination finally meet the truth buried beneath years of silence, the story that emerges is both devastating and necessary. Emily Carter's story ended on a lonely forest road in 1998. But for 26 years, the forests of Oregon kept her secret safe beneath the soil. Until the day investigators returned and finally listened to what the ground had been waiting to say all along. In the months that followed the trial, life in the small communities of Oregon slowly returned to something resembling normal. But for many residents, the story of Emily Carter never truly faded. For 26 years, her disappearance had existed like a shadow over the town. People remembered the night she vanished, the search parties combing the forests, the flyers posted in shop windows, and the quiet fear that spread through the community when no answers came. Now the answers had arrived, and with them came a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. Relief that the truth was finally known. Sorrow that the truth had taken so long to surface. The forest road where Emily's car had once been discovered remained unchanged. Tall pines still lined the narrow stretch of pavement, and the same wind still whispered through the trees at dusk. But people drove that road differently now. They slowed down. They remembered. Detective Mark Holloway officially retired the following spring. He had spent more than 30 years working cases across the region, but colleagues often said the Carter investigation would always be the one most closely associated with his name. At his small retirement gathering, someone asked him why he decided to reopen the file after so many years. Holloway paused before answering. "Cold cases are never really closed," he said. "They're just waiting." He explained how the smallest details had drawn him back into the investigation: a forgotten witness statement, a pattern in Thomas Grady's movements, the fiber evidence that no one had fully analyzed with modern technology. Each clue alone meant little. Together, they told a story that had been hiding in plain sight. Over time, investigators across the country began studying the Carter case as an example of how patience and modern forensic tools could bring resolution to even the oldest mysteries. Cold cases from the 1980s and 1990s were being reopened everywhere. Some relied on new DNA technology. Others depended on digital databases that allowed investigators to connect evidence across state lines. But many still came down to something simpler. People remembering what they once thought was unimportant. A light seen on a road. A truck parked where it shouldn't have been. A conversation overheard years ago. Time changes how memories are understood. And sometimes, those memories are the final pieces investigators need. For Emily Carter's family, the years following the trial were quiet. They avoided media interviews and rarely spoke publicly about the case again. Instead, they focused on rebuilding a sense of peace that had been missing for decades. Emily's mother often visited her daughter's grave. The headstone was simple: just her name, her birth year, and the year 1998. Visitors sometimes left small items beside it: flowers, photographs, even handwritten notes from people who had followed the story over the years. One note read simply, "You were never forgotten." The Carter case also changed the way local law enforcement approached unsolved crimes. In the years after the conviction, detectives in Oregon created a specialized unit dedicated entirely to reviewing unsolved disappearances and homicides. Boxes of old files were reopened. Evidence long stored in sealed containers was re-examined with modern forensic tools. Photographs, witness statements, and timelines were studied again with fresh eyes. Some of those investigations led nowhere, but a few began to move forward. Because sometimes, the passage of time doesn't bury the truth. Sometimes it slowly reveals it. On the 20th anniversary of Emily's disappearance, long before the case had been solved, residents once gathered at a candlelight vigil in the town square. Hundreds of small lights flickered in the darkness as people stood together in silence. At the time, no one knew if the mystery would ever be resolved. But they lit candles anyway. They lit them because remembering mattered. Now, years after the trial, some of those same residents still gather quietly each fall. Not for a vigil anymore. For a remembrance. Emily Carter's story began as a tragedy that left a community searching for answers. It ended as something else. A reminder that even the quietest towns can hold secrets. And that those secrets, no matter how deeply buried, have a way of finding the light again. Cold cases often stretch across decades. Files grow dusty. Witnesses move away. Evidence seems to fade. But somewhere inside those old folders, the truth still waits. Waiting for the right question. Waiting for the right moment. Waiting for someone who refuses to stop looking. And sometimes, after many years of silence, that truth finally speaks. Years after the trial, the Carter case continued to be discussed in classrooms, police academies, and investigative seminars across the United States. Not because it was the most violent crime. Not because it involved a complex conspiracy. But because it showed something investigators often forget when dealing with old files. Time does not erase evidence. It only changes how that evidence is understood. In training sessions for new detectives in Oregon, instructors sometimes use the Carter case as an example of persistence. They would place the original file on a desk, a thick binder filled with photographs, witness statements, and reports typed on aging paper. At first glance, it looked like hundreds of other unsolved cases. A missing person, a car left abandoned, no body, no clear suspect. But hidden inside that file were details that had quietly waited for someone willing to re-examine them. The diner receipt timestamp. The forgotten witness who remembered headlights on the forest road. The fiber discovered on the passenger seat. Individually, each clue seemed small. Together, they eventually formed the path that led investigators back to Thomas Grady. For young detectives studying the case, the lesson was simple. Cold cases are puzzles that time has scattered. Solving them often means finding pieces everyone else once overlooked. Meanwhile, the town where Emily Carter had lived continued to move forward. New families arrived. Old storefronts change owners. The diner where Emily once worked eventually reopened under new management, though longtime residents still remembered the young waitress who had greeted customers late at night with a tired but genuine smile. Sometimes visitors who had heard about the case would stop by and ask questions. Older employees would quietly tell them that yes, this was the place. This was where Emily had finished her last shift. This was where she walked into the parking lot and drove away into the darkness of that October night in 1998. No one there ever forgot. But life, as it always does, continued. Detective Mark Holloway occasionally received letters after his retirement. Some were from students studying criminal justice. Others were from families dealing with their own unsolved tragedies. They asked him the same question in different ways. How do you keep working on a case that seems impossible to solve? Holloway's answer rarely changed. You don't solve cold cases by chasing ghosts, he once wrote in a reply. You solve them by respecting the details. He explained that most investigations fail not because evidence disappears, but because people stop looking at it carefully. The Carter case proved that patience could outlast silence. It proved that even a secret buried beneath 26 years of time could still be uncovered. Every autumn, when the forests of Oregon begin turning shades of gold and red, the road where Emily Carter disappeared becomes almost beautiful. Sunlight filters through tall pine trees. Leaves scatter across the pavement. Drivers passing through might never guess that the quiet landscape once held one of the region's most haunting mysteries. But the story remains part of the place. Not as a legend, not as a rumor, as a reminder. A reminder that justice sometimes moves slowly. A reminder that the truth can remain hidden in ordinary places. And a reminder that behind every cold case file lies a real person whose life was interrupted. For Emily Carter, the search for answers lasted 26 years. For her family, those years were filled with uncertainty, hope, and grief. But in the end, the silence surrounding her disappearance was broken. The forest gave back its secret. The investigation found its conclusion. And a case that once seemed destined to remain unsolved finally reached the moment every cold case hopes for. the truth. Even if it arrives decades later. Even if it arrives quietly. Because in the end, time may bury the past, but it can never erase it.